All right, y'all, let's talk war in Europe. So, our central question is what major events occurred in the European theater of World War II? Make sure you write that at the top of your notes or in your or directly into your notebook, either one. So, at the start of World War II, kind of the final straw, if you'll remember, was Germany invading Poland. Um, the European superpowers had been appeasing him and letting him have stuff and letting him have stuff, and finally the invasion of Poland was kind of like, that's it, you're done, no more. Um, so when the United States gets involved after Pearl Harbor, we're still putting Germany first. So yes, we declared war on Japan first, and in turn, Germany declared war on us. But our priority becomes defeating Germany in Europe. At this point, Hitler was in control of most of Europe and North Africa. He had troops stationed in many countries. But thankfully, Hitler makes a couple of big mistakes. The first, he invades the Soviet Union in 1941. And second, he declares war on the United States before he finished defeating Great Britain. So he lures the United States into war with Germany before he has taken care of Great Britain. By late 1941, Hitler was stopped just short of Moscow. You guys can see on the map the darker orange were the Axis powers and their allies. The lighter orange are the Axis-held territories as of December of 1941. So at its biggest point. The Allied powers are the blue, and then the neutral nations are the kind of grayed out ones. And you guys can see the red outline is how big Germany was at its biggest point. It included all of East Prussia, most of Poland, and then obviously all of Germany. Roosevelt and Churchill, remember Prime Minister of Great Britain, had promised Stalin, who's still in charge of the Soviet Union, they would open up a separate front against Germany to help relieve the pressures on the Soviet army. So Germany had invaded the Soviet Union, and so Roosevelt and Churchill have promised him that we will open up the western border of Germany so that those troops have to be split, and that should relieve some of the pressure on those Soviets that are at battle. Invading African Italy, Americans and British began one of the greatest collaborations in military history in terms of working together and collectively. Churchill advised delaying before we invaded Europe. He wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page, that troops were stationed in the proper places, and that everybody was on the same page before an actual invasion occurred. 1942, Allied troops are going to land in northern Africa. They fairly easily defeat German forces. They cross the Mediterranean, and in 1943 they advance into both Sicily and Italy. George Patton, he is commander of the Third Army and the first to invade North Africa and Sicily. A little bit about his background. He comes from a military family. His father served as well as other family members. He helped in the expedition against Pancho Villa in the Spanish-American War, and he also served under John J. Pershing in World War I. So he has a pretty fantastic military history. Well known, had made a great name for himself in the military. He thought that American soldiers needed a killer instinct if they were to find success in combat, and that thought was kind of twofold for him. It made him popular because he worked hard. He expected excellence from his soldiers, and so lots of people made it out alive. But he was also known for being really harsh in his treatment of his subordinates. So while they came home alive, he was cruel and mean. But like he said, that killer instinct, he would have had to have those high expectations of his soldiers. The invasion of France, 1944, Germans suspected an invasion, but they didn't expect the type of invasion that the Americans, Canadians, and the British had planned for them. D-Day, or Operation Overlord, was June 6th, 1944. 156,000 troops under the command of Dwight Eisenhower, stormed 5 beaches on the northwest coast of France. Still today, this is the largest amphibious operation in history. Amphibious just means that it was by boat. The boats got as close as they could, and then they hopped literally into the water and ran to shore amongst heavy, heavy, heavy gunfire. They were successful. The casualties were heavy. It was bloody. It was awful. But it was successful, and Paris was liberated in August of 1944. A couple of pictures you guys can see. The top right shows you really good pictures about 1st and 4th Divisions from the United States, 50th and 3rd Division from Great Britain, and then the 3rd Division from Canada, all storming those 5 French beaches. The picture graph on the left, what I really want you to hone in on is the 1st U.S. Army was General Omar Bradley. He's somebody that the state of Texas deems pretty important. So speaking of Omar Bradley, he was personally selected by Eisenhower to lead the 1st American Army. His men were some of the first to reach the beaches of France. The Battle of the Bulge. So we were fairly successful. Again, it was bloody, it was awful, but we did find success. So we were moving quickly inland in France, and so we were a little bit caught off guard when there was a German counterattack in December of 1944. It was the largest and bloodiest battle fought by Americans in World War II. There were over 89,000 American casualties, 40 days of constant fighting. So Battle of the Bulge, largest and bloodiest. The invasion of Germany. American, British, and Free French forces led the invasion into Germany from the west, just like they promised Stalin. And Soviet forces countered and entered in the east. And in May of 1945, the Soviets did capture Berlin, which was serving as Germany's capital. Hopefully you already know, but as Germany is forced to surrender, rather than being taken prisoner, Hitler does commit suicide. In all of World War II, as it's coming to an end on the European side, the Soviet Union did suffer the most casualties. They lost 20 million soldiers and citizens at some point in the war. Vernon Baker, one of the first African Americans to actually see combat in war. Remember, we had the Tuskegee Airmen. We had lots of African American soldiers, but up until now, they were not allowed to actually play a part in combat. They did some missions. They did lots of helping bombing missions get to and from in terms of escorting. But Vernon Baker, actual combat, he kind of became a symbol for what African Americans were capable of in terms of selfless sacrifice and courage for the United States. 52 years after World War II, President Clinton did finally award Vernon Baker with a Congressional Medal of Honor, which is the highest level of military recognition that you can earn. It's sad that it took 52 years, but thankfully he was finally awarded that medal. And then the Holocaust, something that you guys probably already know a little bit about, some probably more than others, but just a couple of vocab words so that we're all on the same page. Genocide is an effort to murder an entire people or nationality. And so the Holocaust then refers to the attempted genocide of the Jews during World War II. And then final solution was Hitler's kind of end game, his plan to murder all European Jews. At first, the methods they used were machine guns next to open trenches, where literally they would be shot and fall into open graves. They were gassed in trucks, but Hitler and the Nazis thought that these types of methods were too slow, so they instead built concentration camps all throughout Germany and Poland. Jews arrived on cramped railroad cars, some living, some already deceased from the trip. Most then were killed with poison gas and then burned in giant ovens as soon as they arrived. Some, mostly young, strong men, and then healthy women without children, um, were spared and sent to work at the camps. Um, but the inmates then were starved, denied medical treatment, worked to the bone, cold, hot, not taken care of at all. In total, about 6 million European Jews were killed. But then, in addition to that, about 6 million Gypsies, Slavs, political prisoners, elderly, mentally disabled, and others also died in those concentration camps. So we're talking an immeasurable amount of people. Liberation. During the last months of the war, the Allies advanced into Germany, and this is where they saw the true horror of Nazi Germany. American units were the first to liberate concentration camps, and they were shocked, horrified to see these half-starved, dehydrated, disease-ridden prisoners. I can't even imagine what those first conversations and thoughts were, not only for the prisoners, but also for the soldiers. I think probably equally surprised that the other was there. All right, one quick activity that I want you guys to do, and answer this under your notes. There's some space down in there, but the following is an account from woman prisoner T917 at Lenzing concentration camp. And here's her quote. Now began a frightful time of waiting. We were locked in the camp without food. I was asleep when my sister wakened me. She reported that in front of the camp were 2 young men. They told us that they would get help from the American soldiers who were nearby, but had no idea our camp was there. It took a few hours until they arrived. It was General Patton's Third Army. The soldiers broke open the gate. It must have been a shock for the soldiers when they saw us, emaciated or swollen, pale and dirty creatures. They first provided us with their food rations and soap. So the question that you need to answer about that quote is, who do you think was more surprised at the meeting, the concentration camp inmates or the American soldiers? Explain your answer. So there can't be a right or wrong, as long as you can explain why you think it was the camp inmates or it was the American soldiers. When you are done with that, you are going to receive a Holocaust questionnaire. This is a class set, so please don't write on the actual questionnaire. Instead, you're going to get a half sheet that's numbered 1 through 10 for you to answer in your notebook. So using the class set of questionnaires, you need to answer each question. The sentences and sentence stems have been provided for you. So for each question, there's anywhere from like 3 to 5 or 6 choices. You do need to write the complete sentence. If you choose the third option or the one near the bottom where it kind of leaves it open-ended, like I would do this, use that sentence stem and then fill in your answer to make it a complete sentence. We will discuss these answers. I don't think we'll have time to get through all 10 necessarily, but we will discuss these. So you need to be prepared to defend your answers and explain your answers.